Nothing to do. So your entire party has spent the last year telling us this is the most important thing that has ever happened. We now have evidence that the charges you are making against Trump apply to your own party and your own candidate, and you're ignoring it, and you're throwing this fit on my set telling me, oh, it's not a big deal. Why do you want to talk about the tax bill?
May and July. Obstruction of justice 3 times, violation of Section 1512.
You know what? I honestly, it's hard for me to believe, given everything you've said in the last year, that you're putting on this performance now. Why don't you just say, look, what Hillary did, her campaign paying for intelligence from the Russians, that was bad, but she's not president. Let's move on. You won't even say that.
I don't know what Hillary did, except she
actually
did
we do know. What do you mean we don't know? We know exactly what she did. They admitted it this week.
They admitted that they paid for opposition research. Every campaign
well, of course they all do.
For opposition research.
That comes from the Russians. This dossier came from the Russians.
No, this dossier came from a research firm and a British individual.
Really? And who is the British individual? Do you know?
I believe his name is Mr. Steele.
Yeah. And why was he hired? Because he was the head of the Russia desk at MI6. He was a Russia expert, and the information was about Trump's ties to Russia. They got this information from the Russians, and they paid, in effect, Russian sources for it.
They paid a man to prepare a memo.
Quick, does it bother you? Does that bother you at all?
Not particularly.
Does it bother you? Has the Podesta Group ever lobbied you for anything?
I believe they have. I believe they've also. I believe you're also a friend of Tony.
I'm not a friend of him, and he's never lobbied me. I'm not a sitting.
Well, you're not a member of Congress, yes.
And I'm not a friend of Tony Podesta's. But does it bother you that Tony Podesta took money with Paul Manafort from the Russians to carry their water in Washington?
Does it bother you that Paul Manafort was chair of Trump's campaign?
Yes, it does.
Well,
does it bother you that the Podesta firm was working on behalf of the Russians?
I would like to. If it was true, it would bother me.
It is true. I mean,
You're asserting it. A lot of things are asserted on this.
No, I'm not asserting it.
Okay.
It is factually
You're
true
saying that he failed to file a foreign agent's report.
You know, that's I believe that to be true. What I know is true is that they took money from Russian interests to represent those interests here in Washington.
Well,
and I think by your standards, that's wrong.
When you say Russian interests, if you mean private companies, that's different.
No, I mean I mean the Russian government. I mean the Russian government.
If he did it. Why don't you want to talk about impeaching a president? And your answer is, hey, there's this lobbyist in town who's
because the predicate for this impeachment is exactly
the predicate
same behavior.
You haven't read my articles
of
impeachment are only a page and a half, and you haven't bothered to read them.
Actually, I have read them.
Then you know.
And I think they're even more fatuous now than I did before. Now that I know that there's no principle that undergirds them, that you're willing to excuse anything the Democrats do.
Justice is a crime. It is a felony punishable by 20 years, up to 20 years.
Come back when you got a tax bill and you want to chat about it.
The tax bill's been released, and you can't defend it.
Yeah, right.
California Congressman Ben Sherman is just the epitome of Trump derangement syndrome. And this interaction with Tucker Carlson is not only brilliant, but infuriating and also smart. I love the comment about the bumper sticker. Save the platitudes, okay? But what he was trying to talk about was framing Trump and framing his son about the Russia collusion hoax. And instead of answering any real questions or being a legitimate guest, he kept going back to Trump's tax policy. And by the way, it's so funny to see these throwback clips. Does anyone think that our economy is doing better than it was 3 years ago? Does anyone think we're doing better under Joe Biden and his spending like a drunken sailor? Of course not. This clip aged like a fine potato salad in the hot sun after 3 weeks. And I think Tucker's really holding people like him to task here and saying, what exactly do you mean by your points? And when he had no answer, Tucker basically said, I've never met anyone more disingenuous than you. And he's right. Because every time Congressman had to answer a question, he just went back to the crazy Trump rhetoric that we see from the left all of the time. And thank God we have people like Tucker Carlson holding them to task, because it just shows how phony and fake they are. And if they go on mainstream channels, they'll just applaud for them and nod in unison. Not Tucker. He tells it like it is.